The locker room at St. Jude's Memorial always smells like a combination of industrial lavender bleach and the metallic tang of old copper. It is a basement smell, a place where the sun never reaches, and where the air is thick with the residual exhaustion of 300 nurses and doctors. Una stood in front of locker number 42, the one with the slight dent near the bottom hinge where a frustrated intern had kicked it 3 years ago. The key felt heavy in her palm, a piece of cold brass that did not belong to her. It had been handed to her by the head of nursing, a woman named Martha who looked like she had not slept since the late 90s. Martha had simply said that Hira was not coming back to finish out her notice, and someone needed to clear out her things before the new attending arrived on Monday. Una was the only one who didn't look busy, or perhaps Una was the only one Martha knew would handle Hira's things with the kind of quiet reverence they required. The lock turned with a reluctant grinding click. Inside, it was mostly what Una expected: a spare white coat, the fabric stiff and smelling faintly of starch, a pair of running shoes with the heels worn down, a stethoscope that looked too expensive to be left behind, and then, at the very back, tucked behind a stack of outdated medical journals on trauma surgery, there was the box. It was a simple cardboard thing, originally meant for a pair of boots, but the lid was heavy with the weight of something much denser than leather. Una pulled it out, sitting on the narrow wooden bench that ran between the rows of lockers. Her knees felt weak, though she could not have explained why. She lifted the lid. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them. They were not organized by size or color, but they were all addressed to her. Una. Just Una. No last name, no address, no stamps. Her name was written in Hira's unmistakable handwriting, the sharp vertical slant of a woman who was always in a hurry, yet who took the time to ensure every letter was perfectly formed. Una's breath hitched in the back of her throat. She reached for the one on top. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges, as if it had been sitting in the dark for a long time. She unfolded it, the sound of the paper crisping in the silence of the basement. I am writing this because if I say it out loud, the air in the trauma bay will become too thick to breathe. It is 4 a.m, and you just left. You brought in a motorcycle accident, a 22-year-old boy who didn't think he needed a helmet because the night felt too good to be restricted. You were covered in his blood, Una. It was on your forearms, smeared across your cheek, where you must have brushed your hair back. And yet, you were the calmest person in the room. I watched you give the report. Your voice was steady, a low hum that cut through the shouting of the residents and the rhythmic thumping of the chest compressions. I found myself looking at your hands while you spoke. They were steady. How are they so steady? I have been an attending for 6 years, and my hands still shake when the doors swing open and the sirens are still echoing in the hallway. You looked at me once, right before you turned to go back to the ambulance. You didn't say anything, but you nodded, a small, sharp movement that felt like a secret handshake. I wanted to ask you how you do it, how you go back out into the dark after seeing what we just saw. But instead, I just looked down at my chart and pretended I didn't see the way the light caught the gold in your eyes. I think I am going to keep this letter. I think I am going to keep all of them. Because if I tell you that I think about your hands when I am trying to fall asleep, you will think I am as broken as the patients you bring me. And maybe I am. Maybe that is why I like the night shift. Everything is broken at 4 a.m, and no one expects it to be anything else. Una let the paper rest against her thigh. The physical sensation of Hira's words felt like a phantom touch against her skin. She remembered that night. The motorcycle accident had been a mess, a blur of red and blue lights and the smell of burning rubber. She remembered the way Hira had looked, pale, her dark hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked painful, her eyes like flint. Yuna had always thought Hira was untouchable, a machine made of medical knowledge and cold precision. She had never imagined that while she was scrubbing blood off her arms in the back of the ambulance, Hira was in the on-call room, writing about the gold in Yuna's eyes. The basement was cold, but Yuna felt a sudden sharp heat rising in her chest. She reached into the box and pulled out another letter. This one written on the back of a hospital cafeteria menu. It was dated 6 months after the first. You are wearing that peppermint lip balm again. I can smell it every time you stand next to the gurney to give me the vitals. It is a ridiculous smell for a hospital. It smells like Christmas and childhood and things that have nothing to do with the smell of antiseptic and old floor wax. Today, you brought in a woman who was 94 years old and just tired of living. She wasn't sick. Not really. Her heart was just finished. You held her hand the whole way from the ambulance to the room? I saw you. You didn't let go until I stepped in to listen to her chest. You treat them like people, Yuna. I don't know how you haven't burned out yet. I treat them like puzzles. If I think of them as puzzles, I don't have to think about the fact that they have daughters who are going to cry in the waiting room. But when I see you hold a hand like that, the puzzle pieces start to look like skin and bone again, and it hurts. I wanted to tell you today that you have a smudge of ink on your thumb. I wanted to reach out and rub it off. I imagined what your skin would feel like, warm, probably, much warmer than mine. I stayed in the break room for 20 minutes after you left, staring at the coffee machine and wondering if you like your coffee black or with too much sugar. I bet it is sugar. You seem like someone who needs the sweetness to balance out the things you see on the road. I am being petty tonight. I am annoyed that you didn't look at me today. You were too busy with the 94-year-old woman. I am jealous of a dying woman because she got to hold your hand. I should probably burn this. I should probably go home and sleep for 12 hours and forget that I ever noticed the smell of your lip balm. But I won't. I will put this in the boot box, and I will see you tomorrow night, and I will be cold and professional, and I will never mention the ink on your thumb. Yuna's thumb instinctively rubbed against her forefinger. She did always have ink on her hands. The cheap pens the ambulance service provided always leaked. She looked around the empty locker room, half expecting Hira to be standing there, watching her realize how much had been happening in the silence between them. The silence had always felt comfortable, a professional understanding between two women who worked the hours most people spent dreaming. But now, the silence felt like a lie. It was a container for all these words that were currently spilling out into the cold basement air. Yuna felt a strange, fluttering ache in her stomach, the kind of feeling she usually only got right before a high-speed transport. She picked up a third letter. This one was shorter, the handwriting jagged and frantic. I hate this place tonight. I hate the way the lights flicker in hallway 3. I hate the sound of the telemetry monitors. Most of all, I hate that I am waiting for the sound of your siren. It is a quiet night, which is supposed to be a blessing, but it just means I am left alone with my own head. I keep thinking about the way you laughed last week when the drunk guy in Bay 4 tried to propose to you. It was a real laugh, not the polite one you give the doctors, but a deep, honest sound. I was standing behind the curtain, and I froze. I have never heard you laugh like that. It made me realize that I don't know anything about you. I don't know where you grew up, or if you have sisters, or why you decided to become a paramedic. I just know the way you move in a crisis. I know the way you tilt your head when you're listening to a lung sound. It isn't enough. Or tonight, I think I might actually say tonight, I think I might actually say something. I might ask you if you want to get a drink when our shift ends at 7, but then I remember that you probably have a life. You probably have someone waiting for you in a bright apartment with plants and a cat. You don't want to get a drink with a woman who has dark circles under her eyes and forgets to eat lunch. I am going to go wash my face and try to be a doctor again. Don't come in tonight, Yuna. Stay safe out there. Just stay away from me. Yuna closed her eyes. She didn't have a cat. She didn't have anyone waiting in a bright apartment. She had a studio with a single window that faced an alleyway, and she usually spent her mornings sleeping through the noise of the city. She had wanted that drink. She remembered that specific night, the quiet one. She had spent 3 hours sitting in the ambulance bay, staring at the hospital doors, wondering if she should go inside and find an excuse to talk to Hira. She had even walked as far as the vending machine, but she had seen Hira through the glass of the trauma desk, looking so focused, so intense, that Yuna had turned around and walked back to the rig. They had been two magnets with the same polarity, pushing each other away while trying to get close. Yuna felt a tear track down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She reached for the next letter. This one was dated the night of the child case. Yuna's heart sank before she even opened it. She remembered that night with a clarity that still made her blood run cold. A 6-car pileup on the interstate. A 4-year-old girl who didn't make it despite everything they did. I am sitting on the floor of the supply closet. If anyone finds me here, I will tell them I am checking the inventory on chest tubes. My chest hurts, Yuna. It feels like someone has reached inside and is squeezing my lungs. We lost her. We did everything right. I followed every protocol, I gave every medication, I performed every maneuver, and she still died. And you were there. You were the one who brought her in. And you stayed. You didn't have to stay. Your shift was over, but you stood against the wall and watched us try. When I finally called the time of death, I didn't look at the parents. I couldn't. I looked at you, and for the first time, I saw you break. You didn't cry, not exactly, but your face went so still it looked like marble. You walked out of the room, and I followed you a few minutes later, though I don't know why. I found you by the ambulance doors, looking at the rain. I wanted to touch your shoulder. I wanted to put my head against your back and let you carry the weight of it for just a second. But I stood there like a coward. I stood 5 feet away and watched you breathe in the cold air. Then you did the thing that I will never forget. You turned around and you saw me, and you didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "We did our best." You just reached into your bag and handed me your thermos. It was still hot. The coffee was bitter and cheap, but it was the only thing that felt real in a world that had just let a 4-year-old girl die. I didn't even say thank you. I just took it and drank it while you watched me. So we stood there for 10 minutes in total silence, sharing the air and the grief, and it was the most intimate moment of my entire life. I love you. I realized it as I was swallowing that bitter coffee. I love you, and I am so terrified of it that I want to run until I hit the ocean. You are the only person who sees the person behind the white coat, and I don't know if I can handle being seen. I am putting this letter at the bottom of the box. I hope I never write another one. I hope I find the courage to be normal around you again. But I think the damage is done. You gave me your coffee, and now I am yours, whether you know it or not. Yuna's hand was shaking so hard the paper rattled. She remembered the heat of that thermos. She remembered the way Hira's fingers had brushed hers when she took it, a split second of contact that had felt like an electric shock. Yuna had gone home that morning and sat in her shower for an hour, trying to wash away the feeling of the hospital, but she couldn't wash away the image of Hira drinking that coffee. She had thought she was being intrusive. She had thought Hira probably wanted to be alone. She had no idea that her simple gesture had been felt as a declaration of love. The weight of the missed opportunity felt like a physical burden. How many times had they stood in that same hallway, inches apart, with a universe of unsaid words between them? Yuna reached for the next letter, her vision blurred by the tears she was no longer trying to hold back. This one was from the week Yuna had her accident. I almost died tonight. Not because anything happened to me, but because I saw your ambulance on the monitor. They said Unit 12 involved in a T-bone collision, and the world just stopped. I forgot how to be a doctor. I forgot how to speak. I stood in the middle of the ER, and I think I stopped breathing for a full minute. When they brought you in, and I saw the blood on your arm, I think I actually growled at the resident who tried to take your vitals. I had to do it myself. I needed to feel your pulse under my fingers to believe you were still alive. You were so calm, as usual. You kept telling me it was just a scratch, that the other driver was worse off, that I should go check on them. I wanted to scream at you. I wanted to shake you and tell you that the rest of the world doesn't matter if you aren't in it. But I just cleaned the cut on your arm. I was so careful. I used the smallest needle for the stitches because I didn't want to leave a scar on you. You looked at me while I was working, and for a second, I thought you were going to say something. You reached out with your good hand, and you almost touched my hair. I could feel the heat of your palm. But then, the sirens started again, and someone called my name, and the moment was gone. You left an hour later, and I went into the bathroom and threw up. I can't do this anymore, Yuna. I can't keep loving someone who doesn't know she's being loved. It is making me a bad doctor. It is making me a ghost. You are so bright, and I am just a shadow following you around this hospital. I found out why you came to this city. I heard the nurses talking. They said you left someone behind in Chicago, someone who hurt you. I wanted to find that person and destroy them. But then I realized that I am hurting you too, in my own way, by being this cold, distant thing that you have to deal with every night. I'm sorry. I'm not brave enough to be what you need. Yuna let out a jagged sob. The accident had been minor, but the terror in Hira's eyes that night had been anything but. Yuna had noticed it. She had felt the way Hira's hands had trembled as she tied the sutures. She had reached out to comfort her, to tell her it was okay, but the walls of the hospital had felt too high. The roles they played too rigid. She had let her hand drop. She had let the silence win. She thought about the someone she had left in Chicago, a woman who had made her feel small, who had treated her love like a burden. She had come to this city to be invisible, to bury herself in the work. She hadn't expected to find someone like Hira, someone who was a fortress with a heart of glass. Yuna looked at the box. It was nearly empty now. There were only a few letters left. The handwriting in the later ones was different, slower, more deliberate. The anger was gone, replaced by a quiet, devastating resignation. We went to tea today. You asked me, and I said yes, and for 2 hours, I forgot that the hospital existed. We sat in that little place on the corner of Fifth, the one that always smells like toasted cinnamon. You told me about your grandmother's garden. You told me that you like the way the city looks at dawn when the fog is still hugging the buildings. I didn't say much. I was too busy memorizing the way your eyelashes cast shadows on your cheeks when you looked down at your cup. I wanted to tell you everything then. I had the words in my mouth, tasting like Earl Grey and sugar. I wanted to say, Una, I have 40 letters addressed to you in a boot box in my locker. But I looked at you, and you looked so happy. You looked like someone who had finally found peace. And I realized that if I told you, I would be handing you a burden. I would be asking you to take care of my heart, and you already spend your whole life taking care of people. I can't do that to you. I love you enough to keep my secrets. We walked back to the hospital in the rain, and you held your umbrella over me. You got your left shoulder soaked just to keep me dry. I wanted to pull you close and kiss you right there under the street lamp, but I just thanked you for the tea and went back to my shift. That was 3 days ago. I haven't slept since. I think I am going to resign. I can't keep seeing you every night and pretending that I don't want to spend the rest of my life watching you breathe. It is too much. The night shift is finally over for me, Una. I am going to find a job in a clinic, something with sunlight and regular hours. Something where I don't have to wait for your siren to feel alive. This will be the last letter for a while. I don't know if I'll ever give them to you. Probably not. You deserve someone who isn't a mess of unsent letters and hospital trauma. You deserve the sun. Una's heart was racing. Hira had left. She had disappeared 2 weeks ago, leaving only a short note for the department head and a void in the ER that no one else could fill. Una had spent those 2 weeks in a state of numb confusion, wondering what she had done wrong, why the woman who had shared tea and umbrellas with her had suddenly vanished. For the very last letter in the box. For the very last letter in the box. It was a single sheet of paper, not even in an envelope. It wasn't dated. It was written on the back of a prescription pad. I am sitting in my new kitchen. There is a window that looks out over a small park. There are roses blooming out there, deep red ones that look like velvet. I bought a kettle today. It is blue. I stopped. I looked at the roses, and I stopped. I looked at the roses, and I thought about the way you look when you're tired. I don't want to be another person who needs something from you. I just wanted you to know, even if you never read this, that the roses are beautiful. I think I am going to learn how to cook something other than microwave ramen. Maybe I will learn how to make that soup you mentioned, the one with the ginger and the carrots. I am trying to be a person again, Una. It is harder than being a doctor, but I am trying. I hope you are sleeping well. I hope you are still wearing that peppermint lip balm. I hope you know that somewhere in this city, someone is thinking of you and wishing you nothing but the light. Una stood up. Her legs were shaking, but she felt a sudden, fierce clarity. The box was tucked under her arm as she ran out of the locker room, ignoring the surprised looks from the nurses in the hallway. She didn't stop until she was in her car. She didn't have Hira's new address, but she knew where the park with the red roses was. There was only one neighborhood in the city that fit that description, a quiet area near the river. She drove with a focused intensity, her mind replaying every letter, every word, every missed beat of their history. She found the street. It was lined with brownstones and small, well-tended gardens. And there, in a ground floor window, she saw a blue kettle sitting on a stove. Una parked the car, her heart thumping against her ribs like a trapped bird. She walked up the steps and paused at the door. Her hand hovered over the knocker. For a second, she almost turned back. She thought about the silence, the safety of the things they hadn't said. But then she thought about the 40 letters in the box. She thought about Hira sitting in a quiet kitchen, trying to be a person again, all by herself. Yuna knocked. The sound seemed to echo through the entire street. A moment later, the door opened. Hira stood there, wearing a soft gray sweater and jeans. She looked different without the white coat, smaller, more vulnerable. Her eyes widened when she saw Yuna, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with the weight of 2 years of night shifts and unsent words. "You left your box," Yuna said, her voice cracking. She held out the cardboard boot box. Hira looked down at it, and the color drained from her face. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they touched the lid. She didn't take the box. She just let her hand rest there, right next to Yuna's. "I wasn't going to give them to you," Hira whispered. Her voice was thin, like paper. "I know," Yuna replied. But I read them. I read every single one." Hira looked up, her flint-like eyes now swimming with tears. "Then you know," she said. "I know that you like your coffee bitter and that you think I have gold in my eyes," Yuna said, a small, watery smile breaking through her tears. "And I know that you've been carrying all of this alone for way too long." Hira let out a breath that sounded like a sob. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "The kettle just whistled," she said, her voice shaking. "I was about to make tea. Do you have 15 minutes? Yuna stepped across the threshold, the box still clutched to her chest. "I have as long as you need," she said. "I'm not on shift tonight. I'm not going anywhere." They stood in the small, sunlit kitchen, the smell of ginger and carrots faint in the air. The blue kettle was steaming on the stove. Hira reached out and took the box from Yuna's hands, setting it carefully on the counter. Then, of Hira's skin, a warmth that was even of Hira's skin, a warmth that was even better than she had imagined. "I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner," Hira whispered, her face inches from Yuna's. "I'm sorry I made you wait through all those nights." Yuna shook her head, closing the gap between them. "The night is over, Hira," she said. "We're in the light now." And when they finally kissed, it didn't feel like a medical emergency or a high-speed transport. It felt like coming home after a very long shift. It felt like the truth. The letters remained on the counter, a testament to the years of silence that had finally been broken. They would keep them perhaps, or maybe they would burn them together one day when the words didn't need to be written down anymore. But for now, they were just paper and ink. The real story was happening in the quiet of the kitchen, in the way Hira's hand fit perfectly into Yuna's, and in the way the sun caught the gold in Yuna's eyes, just like Hira had always said it did. The silence was gone, replaced by the soft sounds of a life being built, one word at a time. They sat at the small table, the blue kettle between them, and for the first time in 6 years, Dr. Hira didn't have to be the one who saved everyone. Afternoon sun began to dip toward the afternoon sun, began to dip toward the horizon. The shadows they cast were long and graceful. Yuna reached across the table and took Hira's hand. Her own hands were steady, just as they had always been. But now, they were holding something that wouldn't break. They talked about the clinic and the garden and the things they wanted to do now that they weren't living their lives in the margins of other people's tragedies. They talked until the tea went cold and the stars began to peek through the city's haze. And when the night finally came, it wasn't a place of exhaustion or fear. It was just a time to sleep side by side in a room that finally felt like it belonged to both of them. The box stayed on the counter, its lid closed, its secrets finally shared. It was the end of the letters, but it was the beginning of everything else. Yuna realized, as she watched Hira laugh at a story about the blue kettle, that some things are worth the wait, even if the wait lasts for 41 letters and 1,000 night shifts. The things we never say are powerful, but the things we finally find the courage to speak are the ones that save us. And in the quiet of that brownstone, two women who had spent their lives healing others finally found the way to heal each other. It wasn't a perfect ending, because life in the city is never perfect, but it was an honest one. It was a story written in the gaps between heartbeats, a story that had finally found its voice. And as the moon rose over the park, casting a silver glow over the red roses, the only sound was the steady, rhythmic breathing of two people who were no longer afraid of the dark. The night shift was over, and the morning was waiting, bright and full of promise. Yuna squeezed Hira's hand one last time before falling into a deep, dreamless sleep, knowing that when she woke up, she wouldn't have to look for a letter to know what was in Hira's heart. She would just have to look at the woman beside her, and that was more than enough. The weight of the past had been lifted, replaced by the simple, profound reality of being seen. No more puzzles, no more secrets, just two women, a blue kettle, and the quiet certainty that they were exactly where they were supposed to be. The letters had done their work. They had carried the weight until the hands were ready to take it, and now the hands were full, and the heart was whole, and the night was just a memory. The 41 letters would stay in their box, a map of the journey they had taken to find each other, but the journey itself was over. They had arrived, and as the first light of dawn began to touch the window, the world felt new again, as if it had been waiting for them to finally say the words out loud. "I love you" was no longer a sentence on a page. It was the air they breathed, the light in the room, the very foundation of their new life. And in that light, everything was beautiful. Everything was real. Everything was finally, mercifully, quiet. The story of the night shift had ended, and the story of the rest of their lives had begun. And it was a good story. When she woke up, and for the first time when she woke up, and for the first time in a long time, the world was exactly as it should be. The silence was no longer a wall. It was a bridge, and they had crossed it together, hand in hand, leaving the shadows of the hospital basement far behind. The red roses in the park nodded in the morning breeze, as if they knew the secret too. The secret that love, even when it is tucked away in a cardboard box, always finds its way to the person it was meant for. It just takes time. It takes patience. And sometimes it takes a blue kettle and a little bit of courage to finally open the door and let the light in. But once the light is in, it stays. It warms the cold corners of the heart and turns the ghosts of the past into the memories of a life well lived. And as the city began to wake up around them, two women slept on, safe in the knowledge that they were no longer alone in the dark. The letters were finished. The conversation had begun, and it was the most beautiful thing Yuna had ever heard. The quiet of the room was a different kind of quiet now. Not the silence of things unsaid, but the peace of things understood. Every breath was a promise, every heartbeat a confirmation. They had survived the long night, and the day was theirs to keep. The boot box was just a box again, and the letters were just paper, because the love they held had finally moved into the hearts of the women who owned them. And that, Una thought, as she drifted deeper into sleep, was the most important thing of all. The words had found their home, and so had she. The end of the letters was not a goodbye, but a long-awaited hello. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, the brownstone was filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the heater. It was the warmth of two souls finally at rest, two lives finally intertwined, two women who had found each other in the middle of the night and decided to stay until morning. And morning was finally here. It was bright, it was clear, and it was beautiful, just like the roses, just like the gold in her eyes, just like the love that had been waiting in a box for 41 letters to be read. It was enough. It was everything, and it was only the beginning. The night shift was over, and the world was wide open, waiting for them to step out into it together. And they would. When they woke up, they would walk out that door, and they would never look back at the shadows again, because they had the light now, and the light was all they ever needed. The letters had served their purpose, a bridge across the silence, and now that the bridge had been crossed, they could simply be a part of the history that made them who they were. They were the women who found each other in the dark, and they were the women who would walk together in the sun. And that was the truest thing anyone could ever say. The story was complete, not because it had reached an end, but because it had reached a beginning. A beginning filled with tea and roses and the steady, unwavering presence of a love that had been tested by the night and found to be stronger than the dawn. It was a good place to be. It was the only place to be. And as the city hummed with life outside, the two of them stayed in their own quiet world, a world where the words were finally, beautifully enough. The blue kettle sat on the stove, a silent witness to the change, its color a bright reminder of the woman who had brought the light back into the room. And as the day unfolded, the letters in the box seemed to settle into the cardboard, their work done, their message delivered. They were the echoes of a heart that was no longer lonely, the whispers of a soul that had finally been heard. And in the stillness of the afternoon, the only thing that mattered was the warmth of the hand holding hers, and the knowledge that the next letter wouldn't need to be written at all. It would be lived, moment by moment, in the simple, everyday beauty of a life shared. And that was the best story of all. The one that didn't need a box. The one that didn't need a secret. The one that was just theirs, forever and always, in the bright, as clear light of day. The night shift was a memory, a part of the foundation, but the house they were building was made of sunlight and roses and the steady, quiet strength of two women who had finally found their way home. And home was not a place, but a person with gold in her eyes and peppermint on her breath, and a heart that was no longer afraid to be seen. It was the most beautiful home Una had ever known, and she was never going to leave. The box would stay on the counter for a while, a reminder of how far they had come, but eventually it would find a place in a closet, tucked away with the old white coats and the stethoscopes, a part of the past that they would look back on with a smile. Because the present was so much better. The present was real. The present was her. And as the sun began to set on their first day together, Yuna knew that the night would no longer be a place of shadows, but a place of rest. Because they had each other, and that was the only light they would ever need. The story of the 41 letters had ended, and the story of Hira and Yuna was just getting started. And it was going to be a long, beautiful story, filled with all the things they had finally found the courage to say. No more unsent letters, just a life lived out loud together. And that was the greatest confession of all.